Actually,
Khuyen, welcome to Talk Python to me. great to
yeah,
have you here.
I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I'm happy to have you here. It's going to be a super fun data science topic. You've got a really cool project over at CodeCut.ai, and one of our listeners reached out and said, "You have Khuyen on because she's doing amazing stuff over at CodeCut.ai, and I'm really getting a lot of value out of it, and I'd love to, hear more about this project and maybe dive into some of the topics there." So we're going to have a really great time talking about that. But before we get to those, really quick introduction for everyone. Who are you?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Khuyen Tran. I'm a developer advocate at Nixler. I am also the founder of CodeCut, where I share daily tips on both LinkedIn and through my newsletter, and I send out short tips which have about data science and Python in a form of code snippets that is very easy to digest in 2 minutes, 3 times per week.
3 times a week. That's
Yeah,
a lot.
yes, it's a lot of work, but I have been doing it for 4 years, I think.
Uh huh.
So um, I have been writing Python snippets for like basically every day of the week on the weekday for 4 years. So
Yeah, very fun. And you also have longer form articles there.
yes, that is correct. I also enjoy writing long form articles that dive deeper into open source. So majority of the time, like 95% of the time, I write about open source Python data science related to so very specific. And I like to really explore how what how does this tool why should data scientists use this tool and how they use it. And my assumption for every article is data scientists are very busy, and if they only have 5 minutes to read this article, they will be able to get some takeaway from this tool and be able to apply right away. So you will see that as a common theme for micro snippets, as for like newsletter, like very short, very easy to digest, as well as article, even though it's long form, but it also very like if they want to, they can skim it, get something out of it, or if they really want to like dive deeper, you can sit down and like code along, and both will work for getting something out of it.
Yeah, I agree. I read a bunch of your articles, and I think you can certainly get it a lot, even if you just have only time to skim them. I learned a couple of extra or new tools. I think that we're going to have a lot of fun to talk about as well. So, how do people get your code snippets? Is that through your newsletter, or how you do that?
Yeah, people get my code snippets through my newsletter. And if you go to the front page, see if
Mm-hmm.
you find how it looks like. Yes, that's how it looks. So just for the audience who's listening, so the form of my newsletter is I
Oh
would
yeah.
extract like some specific feature out of the tool, right? Because if the one tool can have many features and you don't want to talk about all the features in one code snippet, it will be really difficult to digest. So I pick one feature, I compare it with something that people already know.
Mm.
For example, in the screen we are comparing between a regular expression, regex, library, and difflip, and I want to so compare with something people already know, something that is lesser known, to highlight, okay, we see the typical problem with the tool that people already know, and here's a solution, and this tool offer the solution. And so that's through code snippet. My philosophy when it comes to teaching people is it's better to show than to tell. So I put a lot of effort into making it very easy for people to, when they look at the code snippet, they can understand. But of course, there's supported text. So if you scroll down a bit more, so you can see the format. No, no, Yeah, we see the problem solution. So problem is, I will just read it out loud here. regex preprocessing achieves exact matching but fails completely on typos like iPhone 14 Pro with like two double R max. um, Solution deeply provides similarity scoring that tolerates typos and character variations, enabling approximate matching where regex fails. And they can view the full article if they want, but it's
Yeah, that's cool.
meant to be digested within the newsletter.
Yeah, I think you could probably read that and get a good bit of information out of that in like 1 minute. That's really nice. And the idea you're highlighting here is like, sure, you can search if you're doing data science, text, NLP type of stuff. If you search with regular expressions, you might find things, but what if the spacing is different between them, or somebody puts a comma, or they put iPhone 14 without a space between the 14 and the
Yeah,
iPhone, right? Like all those things are really tricky to catch every variation. So there's better tools like difflib, which we'll probably talk about again
yeah.
later in an article, right?
And in the article, highlight a lot more tools. So it's from like regex to deflip, and then if you want to like even better, then fuzzy matching, right? And
Yeah.
then if even you want semantic capture, and that's another tool.
And then of course you can go down all the spacey route and
Yeah.
into LLMs and like there's a whole spectrum, right?
Mhm.
But just knowing about this, because sometimes you don't want full machine learning. You just want kind of like regular expressions, but not so hard.
That's correct. Like something that get the job done. To me, is the ideal tool is something that is like works right out of the box without a lot of boilerplate code and not too many dependencies.
Yeah, that's really, really important. So let's talk about the origins of CodeCut.ai. Why did you start it?
So I started when I was in college. So uh, couple 4 years. Uh, eh, so I started to. I didn't start the website. So I start sharing my tips first. I started on LinkedIn, right? So I make a commitment to myself that I'm gonna. So I initially I write a lot of articles. Like I push out 2 to 3 articles on towards data science every week, and I make the commitment. I'm gonna do that every week. And then but I was not very active on LinkedIn. And then I read a book called Share Your Work, and it say how no matter how messy your work is, you should just share it. And I was very into open source tools, and I often, just send a message to my friend, say, hey, like check this out, this is so cool. And I was like, what if I could share it with more people? So I started to, put out some of the things that I excited about on LinkedIn. And initially I was so afraid. People were like, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about.
Yep.
But people also very excited about it. And I was like, oh, great. Like I share something I'm excited about, and help some other people, and everybody excited about the tool. I love that. So I keep doing it. Initially, I do it like every day, so 7 days per week, share every day. Later, I was like, okay, I'll give myself the weekend off. Um, but I started to do, I think, over 500 tips, and then people was like, where can I find the old one, right? Because if you wanna, like, let's say, if you're interested in machine learning tools or data processing tools, how do you find it on LinkedIn? Is There's no way for you to categorize. So I started to go back to most of my there's so many, so I try as many as I can, put it into a website. So it was at the time I just find like some domain, it called Mass Data Simplified, and then I just put a bunch there, and then I send out some newsletter. So very not polished at all, and but I just want to have a place to capture it. And then later I figure out that people was a lot of time people do have typo when they type because it's very long URL. So I try to make it something very short and actually capture what I we do in CodeCut. So it become CodeCut.
Yeah. I like the aesthetic of it. It looks nice. It has got these soft, warm colors.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to keep everything kind of like a cotton candy, so like blue and pink.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, cotton candy definitely comes through. I can see that for sure. What platform did you use to build it?
I use WordPress. But
Nice.
so for articles, I'm creating a workflow where basically I write all my articles in Quarto, like
Yeah,
docu.
yeah, yeah.
So I really like that. So I write and also like run my code in Quarto, and then I use a WordPress API to push it to my article in blog. So I do a lot through like it's create like it's easier than I don't use a WordPress editor to create the the article. I use VS Code through QMD. But for the aesthetic, why I like WordPress because I can like drag and drop, and I'm not a front end developer, so it works for
Yeah.
me.
It's interesting. I think a lot of people who are developers get hung up feeling like they have to create their website in the same language or technology that they're an expert in.
Mhm.
If you're a Python developer, you're like, well, how do I create a website in Python for my blog or, whatever language, right?
Mhm.
But I think there's a lot of value in just saying like it's just a tool. I'm just going to pick it and it's going to be great.
Yeah,
Like for example, I had for a long time I had my stuff in WordPress under my own domain for my blog and other things, and I finally decided to move on to Hugo. But Hugo is also not Go. It's not Python. It's Go, and it's just build static sites. And I think it's really you know it's good if you know the technology, but it's certainly not something I think people should get overly hung
no,
up on because you lose out on good tools that way, right?
yeah, exactly. And I mean, you can learn like you can learn any language, right? If you know one language, you can learn. You're kind of guessing another. It's that, especially now with AI.
Yeah, that's such an interesting topic. I do think that's actually really changed a lot of things. It's like, well, I could work with this, but I know I'll get stuck on something and it'll be a pro. And now you can just ask an agentic AI like, I'm stuck on this. Okay, here you go. And even if it's not perfect, it really, really helps sort of juggle different types of technology.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, super cool. So tell me more about this Quarto thing. I didn't intend to talk about this, but I find it really interesting. Do you write in Markdown? Or do you write in HTML? What do you write in and then publish?
Yeah. Okay. So I write in Quarto. It is in Markdown, right? For somebody
Yeah.
who doesn't know, it's in Markdown, but it's basically really similar to DocMD. The only difference is you can execute the code. So so my really favorite stack is in VS Code. I have Quarto on the left side, and then I open a doc.qmd file. People can just imagine it's like a doc.md file, but you can click the button and you can execute. So
Mm.
it's not very similar to a notebook, right? But I I like it. I really enjoy writing in Markdown, and it's just like a very clean, right? Compared to a
Hmm.
notebook, it's a big QMD. You can think of like a Markdown notebook, just Markdown, and you can execute the code. And this, and then so after I have the image, I have the code, everything. I will so I create some Python functions to clean it up a bit. Like for example, if there's some cell that I roll, but I don't want to show it on WordPress on my website, I will say echo is false, right? It's just like a comment, Python comment on the top of the cell, as you will not show in the website, which is great. And then I can just run publish to WordPress and it's published to WordPress. What is nice about it is, let's say later, some of the content is I want to change. Let's say in 3 articles I mentioned something like a link to something, but now it's broken. So what I can do is I can just like, click search 5 of the instances of it, update it, and then I run the function sync to WordPress, and then it will sync, right? And hey, like I don't need to manually go through each of it to,
Yeah, that's really nice. And it'll just fix all the articles that needed to be changed.
yeah,
Yeah, okay. That's super nice. I do think notebooks are awesome, and the idea of notebooks are, they really changed the game, I think, a lot.
it's
But
yeah,
you don't necessarily want to see all of that when your goal is mostly writing, right? Like you don't necessarily need to see all the import statements if you're only going to focus on one cell worth of code and it's
yeah,
not about the import, right?
right. Especially when my goal is to make it as easy as possible for data scientists to skim. And when you
Yeah,
skim, if you
yeah,
see
yeah.
like a long block of code, you're like, okay, I skip, I'm done. Like I'll read this the next time. But my goal is always very small code snippet and highlight the core features of the tool. And a lot of time, like you need to hide the unnecessary code, right? For that to happen.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. People can get hung up on completeness, and it really takes away from the essence of just like
Mhm.
skimming it. And also, I think that this workflow, it sounds like this is one of the things that made it possible for you to do this frequently, like 3, 4 times a week, instead of
Yeah,
getting overwhelmed, right?
yeah, I really need to learn so many tricks in order to, I guess it's a good thing, right? It pushed me to be more productive. Like I learned a bunch of shortcuts because without shortcut I cannot get things done quickly. So I know a lot of VS Code shortcuts. And like I use a text expansion tool. It's called Expanso, and it's game changer. I can like like view the code of this article, right? If you can just um mm, colon dot something something like 2 words, and then it's expand the whole text, and then you
Yeah,
can fill in the blank. Yeah, I need to learn multiple tricks, and also like just automate things is how I can get it out. But yeah, but what I still find is, um, so by doing that, right, I can actually focus on the essence of the blog, which is to make it as easy as possible to digest, as well as researching, which is like very important
yeah,
for it.
yeah, absolutely. I love your philosophy here. This I can see why the site is popular, and the show your work. I think that's a great philosophy as well. It's like get it out there even if it's messy, and get it out there even if it's incomplete, right? That's the idea.
Yes, exactly, and I really do recommend it for especially people who try to find a job, right? At the time, I kind of like another side effect of it is if you show your work, you show people what you know. Because
Hmm.
I very so many people they know a lot, but they don't share, right? And
Yeah,
if you expect employers to fire you by guessing what you know or look at your resume, it's very hard because everybody now with AI, everybody have very polished, very nice resume. So why should they choose you over another person? But by showing your work, by showing like even the messy one, right? They will be able to see, okay, this is what they're interested in. This is what make them excited about, and this is what they know. Then they will be able to imagine how they can use you in their company. And that's how, because of me sharing my mm, articles as well as LinkedIn posts early on in when I was in college, I was able to land multiple internships in data science.
yeah, super neat. And you're in developer relations, and I think there's a strong communication aspect to that as well. And
Yeah,
this is just another example of like, yeah, look, I you want to hire me for this thing, I'm already doing it, right? Like
yeah,
one of my first important jobs I got, I was doing a lot of speaking at user groups and meetups. They weren't called meetups then because meetup.com didn't exist, but they were they were meetups. And
yeah.
I got a message from a company and they said, "Hey, we saw you talking at this place and that place, and you're doing that for free. We'd pay you to do this if you want to do this for a job." I'm like, "Great." Where do I sign up? Right? I didn't even have to apply. They just reached out to me, and
Nice.
the timing was perfect because I had quit my longtime job a week before, and I'm like, okay, well, I was about to start looking for a new job, but I guess
Wow,
the
you're
new
so
jobs
brave.
are.
You look for a new job after you quit your job? People, that's very brave. Were you like intended to take a break or something?
No, I was not as brave as it sounded. My wife got her PhD and finished, and she was getting her first professor job on the other side of the country. And so I was like, well, I'll wait till we get there and
Mhm.
look for a job because it was, San Diego to New Jersey level of travel. It was far, right? So I figured I'll find something there.
I see. And then you got a new job.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
I think I had quit my job, but I was still working for a month, because I knew I was going to be moving in a while. And so like, okay, guys, I'm leaving in a month, 6 weeks or whatever. And about that time, people reached out. So it was a perfect deal.
I
But
see.
just like you said, it's because of the stuff I was doing out in public, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's dive into CodeCut here. And the idea I thought is maybe we could just go through a handful of articles. We picked 10. I don't know how much time we have to go through all of them. We probably can get through all of them, but I think this will give people an idea of what they can get from CodeCut, but also I just think there's a bunch of interesting data science ideas and tools, kind of
Yeah.
like that difflib that we talked about. So I think it'll be a good blend of that type of stuff to talk about. So let's start with an article called Goodbye Pip and Poetry, Why UV Might Be All That You Need. So tell us about this, and then we can dive in a bit.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people have heard of UV, which is like dependency management tool. But let me, for people who don't know about it, just kind of give some quick reason why UV is might be something that you want to look into. So a lot of data scientists know Conda and know PIP, right? I think poetry is a little bit less common, but for a while, poetry is like a modern tool that allows you to do is manage so many things, right? Like dependency management and virtual environment, and you can it handle anyway. So there's a lot of things in poetry, but UV is but something that I didn't like about poetry is it's pretty slow for dependency management. But when it comes to UV, it's quick, airy, like it replaces many things. And even if you are using PIP, you don't want to learn new tool. Basically, you can just use UV PIP install something, and you have a speed boost. Um, and it's yeah. So I I wrote entire article about UV, and I also um, compared with the existing tools so that to give people some motivation on switching it to UV. It's so easy to switch, so why not?
Yeah, I think I am a huge fan of UV. I actually just interviewed Charlie Marsh for his next project, PYX, a
Oh,
couple days,
nice.
2 days ago. Yeah, so UV is going to get even better. Yeah, I just pulled up the performance story for
It's
UV
crazy.
compared to poetry and PipSync, and yeah, it's what is that? 20 times faster than poetry and way faster than everything else.
It's insane.
It,
Yeah, it's the rust because of the rust.
I
Uh,
think Rust, and then also they just rethought the caching and other. They just it's Rust plus a bunch of new ideas that came together to make it work really, really well. And honestly, I feel a little bit. I don't know, I feel a little bit bad for the other tools. Like I'm a big fan of pip tools and pipx,
me too.
and those things are really great, and we'll come back and talk about them a bit, I think, as well. But I think those tools laid the foundation for what UV is doing, and UV, sort of naturally brought these together. But whenever I think of the contributors and maintainers of those projects, I feel a little bit bad because they're not getting as much love as they used to. But they're still great. But UV is definitely making a splash.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. I get excited about new tools very quickly, and I don't often think about how the maintainers of the old the tools are less popular think. So something good
Yeah.
to think about.
It's yeah, it's the natural way of things, I think, but it's also tough. So the speed is important. One thing I think is interesting, and while I think this is especially interesting for data science, and you touched on this already, is in the I come more from like the web API side of Python, I would say, and over there it's been pip all day long, right? It's been pip the whole time,
Yeah,
but in the data science side, it's really largely been
conda.
Conda, Anaconda distributions, that kind of thing, Conda environments. There's been kind of this separation, and obviously those are all pulling from the same projects. They're all on GitHub and so on. But like, there has been a little bit of a difference, and I feel like UV has made a really big splash in data science and kind of bringing those two worlds back together. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I actually have an article a long time ago. I think it's probably in CodeCut still. It's called Peep versus Conda versus Poetry.
Yeah.
So I was trying to give a very fair comparison. I was in favor of poetry, but I comparing everything, and something that I to be honest, I was not a fan of Conda. And after the comparison, I was not even more of a fan of Conda because I felt like it's very heavy. Like you can use, I think, mini Conda, so it's quicker. But at the same time, it install many dependencies that you didn't ask for. So it's kind of like a solution where you have a lot of dependencies out of the box, right? But I find that a lot of time you didn't ask for some dependencies installed, so you don't really have control over what being installed, as well as the way that it solve dependencies are not. I find it's very slow. But with so poetry was better because it's cleaner. You can see like what you put in. You can see like all everything in a file. Like there's a separate file, right? One is what pyproject.com, and one is a log.
Mm-hmm.
One is the other sub dependencies. And now UV is, to me, it's like that, but to like poetry, but better. The fact that it can run very fast. So one drawback of poetry was sometimes is think very hard about and take a long time to solve install new dependencies. So and also UV replace with X, like it kind of like a all in one place tool, which is I think very necessary, especially for I mean for everybody who use Python, but for data scientists, they already have so many things going on, and to them to learn, good practices. Let's say they want to upgrade right from Python 3.5 to 3.6, 3.7 to use other tools to do it. It seems like a lot of work, but if you can just use one tool and then you can run it, like upgrading in one command line, then why not?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's great, and it has a lot of compatibility with previous workflows. For example, you can use UV pip install instead of using its project management thing, like with add and sync, right? Like, so you don't necessarily have to adopt its style. You can just say, instead of pip install, you can say UV pip install.
Mhm.
One of the things that used to bother me, and I honestly just haven't looked for a while about Conda, was coming from a non-data science side. Like some of the libraries say like requests or Flask or something like that, or
Yeah,
Pyramid, those were held back quite a bit because they try to make sure there's a compatibility between the versions that they
yeah,
ship through Conda, which is, I think that's good for like data science or reproducibility. But when it comes to web frameworks, you got to be super on top of updates in case there's a security vulnerability You want to release that thing the day the vulnerability is announced. You want to upgrade your website because as soon as it's announced, people start scanning the internet for any website that could possibly be susceptible to that problem, right?
Yeah.
And so, like the web tools were held back a lot. So that's one of the reasons I never really embraced Conda.
Yeah.
But
Another, now that you mention it, another, I also found it as one thing I didn't like about Conda is, like there's, let's say data scientists like pandas, right? If this pandas version is available, then a lot of time, like sometimes it's not available on Conda. That's one thing. But another thing is data scientists, they collaborate with other engineers, right? So at some point, they need to hand over to the engineers, like machine learning engineers, data engineers,
right,
to
right,
use their code. And I I think in my previous company, like they were like they didn't use Conda, so for them to like need to install Conda, or there's a way for you to from Conda to pip, but then like the dependencies look very messy, and it's not like a one-to-one translation. Sometimes it's not, you don't get the same environment.
sure,
So
interesting, yeah.
cause another trouble for handing over, right? And that's a reproducible is a big thing when it comes to data science. So, and dependencies play a big part of it. So if you make it mm, hard to reproduce the dependencies, then it, there will be some bugs, there will be some errors, and even worse, silent errors.
Very interesting. Okay, next article. Let's talk about. Whoop, I think this is a big one: reproducibility, maintainability, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
I mean, what you talked about there was kind of a good lead into it, right? It's like the production engineers need to make sure that what they're running runs the same as what the data scientists have tested and come up with. And if the situation is different, right? The runtime environment's different. Well, maybe it's going to give different answers because of different versions or something.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And dependencies is a big thing, but there's also other things that come into it, right? And we can talk about it too.
Yeah. So, what are some of the core ideas of reproducibility?
Yeah, so reproducibility, I think, is and uh, at the heart of reproducibility is you want to let's say, especially for data scientists, when they create code, right? To create machine learning models, they it depends on some. There's a lot when it packages dependencies, but also like depends on the parameters that you use, and like even you use everything the same from experiment to experiment, it can produce slightly different accuracy. So you want to be able to, let's say one data scientist say I got a zero point 0.9 accuracy, and then they hand it over to their teammate to deploy it, and then it's degrading the performance. It's no longer have a zero point 0.9 accuracy. It's probably can be go down zero point 0.8. And so reproducibility is very important in terms of you want people, if you produce some result, you want other people to be able to reproduce the same results, so that your company can profit out of it. But another thing is trust, right? Let's say if you data scientist, you create something that is good, but then you hand it over and it's bad, then it reduces the trust from your your co-workers. The third thing about it is, let's say if data scientists they create some project, and then later they want to reuse it, right? Like for another project, they cannot reproduce the same results. They then it's um and they need to then it's kind of like need to throw it away, creating everything from scratch. So it also time consuming. Um, And another big theme after publicity, I think go hand in hand is maintainability. But yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. The maintainability part is super important as well. And so, what are some of the pieces that go into that? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is pinning your dependencies, either through using something like UV init, UV add, UV sync, or just a requirements.txt file, or pinning your requirements, through some other means like with poetry, but somehow clearly documenting what's used. I think it can be easy for data scientists to just
Yeah.
import some things in a notebook and then do a magic, well, UV pip install that right here and let's just keep going. But then you're like, why won't it run later?
Yeah. Are you talking about maintainability or reproducibility?
Well, I was thinking maintainability,
Yeah, I love.
but both, yeah.
So maintainability, another thing is another aspect that comes into maintainability is readability, right? And I think this is a big thing for data scientists. A lot of data scientists don't write readable code and modular code. What you will see is like a big chunk of code with like nested if else, or using global variables inside a function, or not using function at all, and there's a lot of duplicate in the code. And I mean that is great for quick experimentation, like you want to get something out of it, but at the same time it's create a lot of technical debt in terms of there's multiple things that read to not readable, right? So read, and I can go deeper, but I just want to list it out: readability, and then reproducibility, like, and readability. You want your code to be readable, because data scientists collaborate with other engineers. And if your code, and also another problem I saw is data scientists, they cannot read their old code in like a couple of months. They forgot like what they write. They really like, what did I write? And they spend quite a bit of time to understand what they write. And if they cannot understand or they don't trust it, right? If you don't understand in the full level, you cannot trust it and you cannot
Yeah.
use it for the next project. A lot of times they write things from scratch again. So readability also, if your code is not written well, readability and reproducibility, you cannot, it's harder to reproduce the same result, because let's say global variables, you use global variables and it affects your code, then it's hard. It's you might introduce some external factors that make the code different the next time you run. So
Yeah.
maintainability is very important, and that comes with, sorry, write readable code, version control, dependencies management, configuration management, um,
Oh,
meaning
yeah.
you don't want to hard code the values into your code.
Yeah, this is a really great article here because it shows you so many tools and techniques, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And
Yeah.
I also, so writing a maintainable data science project has been my passion for a long period of time, and it actually has become a book like this is article form, but I also recently wrote a book about this, finished a book about this. It's called Production Ready Data Science.
Yeah, congratulations. That's
Okay.
amazing. When did you finish it? When did you publish it?
uh 2 months ago, I think.
Okay. So really recently, yeah.
Very recently, yeah. It took me quite a while. Like I have all the materials because I've been writing about this. So like I have so many materials to like, put it together, and also make it less in like a article style, explaining more of the why, before the how is also what I focus a lot on this book.
Yeah, that's a super important part. Now, I am a huge fan of thinking a lot about readability and spending a lot of time on readability. And I agree with you. I think we're on the same page for sure on that one, because if your code is not readable, that doesn't mean it can't be read. It just means it's harder to read, right? If your code is not readable, it it's harder to maintain it. It's harder to see the bugs. It's harder to read all the things that you've pointed out. And I think it's a little bit ironic that the notebook style of development
Mhm.
that is meant to communicate, like it's supposed to be more communication compared to regular programming, right? It's It's got the markdown cells, it's got the pictures, it's got little
Yeah.
tables for like df.head, that kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
It its natural way of programming it leads to less maintainable, reusable code, right? Because it does not encourage functions. So
Yeah.
like it's really hard to do reuse if you don't think, oh, maybe I need to write a function in this cell, collapse the cell, and then use the function later, right? That happens, but not very much. I was
Yes.
doing some research for, or just looking around really. Research is a little bit high, put it in a high position compared to what it was. I was looking around for some examples and I found this really cool JPL collection of notebooks for studying, I think galaxies, like studying the brightness of galaxies and trying to understand things about them. And they had a bunch of cool notebooks in there, and they were like 1,500 lines of code
Mhm.
and stuff in there. One function, one. I'm like,
Wow.
oh, that is probably. I mean, maybe this is necessary, but it's probably not necessary. And this is JPL, right? This is like a polished, published thing, not just a random notebook I ran across, right? The
Yeah.
Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, which is, I consider them to be pretty amazing. So
Yeah. I
maybe
mean,
speak to a little bit about that, like this maintainability thing in juxtaposition with like notebook style.
yeah, definitely. That's the thing. I think 5 years ago, I wrote an article that got very popular, but also a lot of controversy. It's called, I think, something about like 7 reasons why I switched from notebook to Python script, something. Um, but so anyway, so the thing about notebook is, y- I a lot of people argue, yeah, you can write functions, like it's just Python, right? You can write function, you can write whatever you want, like just like a Python script. But the interactive style of it encourage kind of discourage you from doing it. Like, why should I write a function when I can just like see the result and then I build upon it, right? Because in notebook, what is so great about it is you can see the result and then you can build up upon it in the next cell, next cell, next cell. So people are less likely to build a function which, like, if you create a function, then like it's hidden inside a function, it's not execute the code. So that's one thing. Another thing problematic about notebook is it encourage hard coding, like
Yeah.
a lot of time because if you want to see the result, you want to put your value in there to see the result. Another thing is, a very big problem is cell execution, right? If you execute cell, the fact that it gives you the ability to execute in different orders is
Hmm.
nice, but also a disadvantage in a way that if you run it in the wrong order,
Yeah.
then it will, like, you get like some can get some result right now that is different from the result that you want to run.
Right. If you forget to run a particular cell, you go back up, run that to refresh it, and then you skip back down. Something in the middle was important, and you don't rerun it. That's probably not good.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I remember when I worked in notebook before, it just gave me a headache because I would run something as a, oh, did I rerun that? Like, did I run that cell or did I not? Just to make sure I will run it. So it's something, and then later when I come back to a notebook, I was like, I'm not gonna reuse this notebook again because I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah. I don't want people to think that I'm completely anti notebook. I'm not. But I do think that there are some techniques and some tips that you can use. So when I was riffing on functions, one thing I think you could do, and you touched on it as well, is you could take the parts of your code that you want to reuse and put that in a Python script next to your notebook and import it, right? And then you can use it. A lot of times, I think there's a bunch of cells in notebooks that don't really have to do with the presentation or the important part. They're just there like, well, I need to load this thing, or I need to like clean up that or something. And it has to go before what you actually want to show people. If you could put that in a script, then
Yeah,
you could just import it and then show the important part.
right.
It's more readable, more reusable, it's more modular. Like in all ways, almost, it's better.
Yes, I agree. The thing about, yeah, Sam, like notebook is great. It's very good for presentation. But I think the problem is a lot of time people use it more than what it's supposed to design for, which is, to me, it's prototype, right? It's to showcase something. To showcase it with either non-technical or technical people. It's not used for like everything, and I think that's a problem. Like a lot of data scientists use it for everything, including writing production ready code. And again, that's another argument, right? Like, should
Yeah.
you write production ready code in notebook? And Netflix did that. Netflix create production ready code in notebooks, and that's great.
Paper mill and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that technology is allow you to do it. I feel like it's still, but at the same time, it's a tool that if you use it right, then it will serve you.
Yeah. It's interesting. Speaking of tools, I know you've written about, talked a little bit about Marimo.
Mhm.
What do you think about that? I think this is a really interesting one. I just did sort of I did a course called Just Enough Python and it's software engineering for data scientists. And I
Nice.
was trying, thanks. Yeah. And it's like, okay, a lot of themes that you talk about as well, like you should probably learn Git, and so on. But one of the things I really struggled with was I really wanted to use Marimo as the foundation, but 90% or more data scientists use Jupyter. So I ended up using Jupyter, but I think Marimo actually might be a, a little bit better in terms of software engineering and a little bit better in terms of
Yes.
this order of operations you talked about, like, because Marimo tracks like, hey, this cell depends upon that cell. So if you rerun this one, we got to rerun that one first. It'll catch those kind of things. But you want to maybe talk about this real quick? Because I know you wrote about it a little bit.
Yeah, I really like Marimo. I think it's great. It has been so I was actually in the middle of writing the book, right? And I know that data scientists love notebook, and I don't want to be like, hey, let's just write Python script. But at the same time, I really think that notebook is really hard to write production ready code, and that's, my book is about production ready code. So how do you find the middle
Exactly.
ground between interactive version of notebook and production ready code? So Marimo came out, and I dig deeper into it. It solved a lot of problems, and first is cell execution order, right? So the problem in notebook is, let's say you cell one, cell two, cell three. You change something in cell one, for example. You are run it, but then you change something in cell one. If you forgot to rerun cell three, then the result is not going to reflect what you have changed in cell one. But with Marimo, it can detect the dependencies, and if you change something in cell one and cell three depend on cell one, depend on the variable in cell one, then it will executed automatically, which is great. Another big thing is, notebook. Another disadvantage of notebook is it is JavaScript, right? So it's very big, unreadable, hard to, if you want to use it for hand it over, reuse it. It's really hard.
Right. It's so common to get a Git conflict when you try to pull a new version just because the output has changed. And that shouldn't even be taken into account,
Yeah,
right?
and yeah, that shouldn't be taken into account. And also the output can be big. But with Marimo notebook is just a Python script under the hood. So
Yeah.
and what great thing about Python script is you can reuse it. You can like import it in another Python script. But also for CI/CD, right? Um, and you can write unit tests. Like with unit tests is important, but with in notebook you can write unit tests. That's hack around, but it's a hack. And
Yeah.
a lot of time people need to put their tests inside the notebook, which is, it's not modular, right? It's not. It's make it very messy with code and then test inside the same place. But like if you write notebook that is Python script under the hood, then you can write unit tests and you can run it with PyTest. Um,
Yeah. Very cool. I think this is I think it's a neat one. I genuinely wanted to use it, but I'm like, but at the same time, I probably got to speak the same language of the people doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So another thing I want to talk about here. I mean, this maintainability article has just got so much good stuff in it. Something I think that might be new to folks is Hydra, right?
Mhm.
Let's talk about this idea of managing configuration files with Hydra.
Yeah, I love Hydra. So Hydra is developed by Facebook Research, and I think I use it. It has been my to go. So I have some core tools I go back for every data science project, and Hydra is one of them. Something that so for I guess so. If you think about Hydra is a configuration management tool, you can write your configuration inside a YAML file, and then you can like call things. You can access the variables inside the YAML file inside a Python script. That is nothing new, right? People know about, like, there's a YAML built-in library in Python that allows you to work with YAML. But something I like about Hydra a lot is reduce the boilerplate code. So you can just add like a decorator to your Python function, and then it will be able to access everything underneath inside the Python function. And instead of using a brackets notation, like for example, you if to access a nested value, you might need to use mutable nested function, but instead you can use dot notation, which is very clean. Other
Yeah.
things are, oh, you can, um, as your project getting bigger, right? I mean, for a small project, maybe a YAML is enough. But as your project getting bigger, let's say you want to be able to use, especially in like data science experimentation, you want to use different values. You want to experiment with different way of processing. You want to experiment with different parameters for your models, and that can get messy. Your YAML file become very big. So a good way to handle this is you want to break it into smaller configuration. But if you want to do that without like Hydra, then you need to write Python functions to access it, to composite it, to put it together, put the pieces of puzzle together. But with Hydra, you can basically everything is handled for you. So you can break it apart, and then you can refer to different part of the pieces. You can like in one YAML file, you can refer to other part of the YAML file. It's kind of like an import, right? Import in Python, and you can override it. Another thing I realized, you can override the parameter from the command line.
Yeah,
So
that's a cool feature.
yeah, so you don't need to go back into the, because a lot of time you want to experiment with different parameters, or inside the production environment and the development environment you might use different parameters. And if you can override from the command line, which is used a lot in uh, you know different platforms, then that will be amazing.
Yeah. It's super neat. Basically, you provide a bunch of default values instead of hard coding them. And then if you need to override them, you can do that through the command line, or you could just do it in code or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, excellent. And you're bringing it all together here in your article. UV run process,
Yeah.
PY, and then over. So you got your Hydra, you got your UV run coming together, all that stuff. So you actually have a whole article. I originally started talking about it because it was in the maintainability section, but you have a whole article called Hydra for Python configuration, right?
Yeah, I that the other article is more like a high level, but then I have smaller articles that talk about each tool.
Super. Okay. Well, we're not making very good progress through this, but that's okay. Because these are really interesting topics. Another one that you talk a lot about is doing proper logging And you recommend Loguru, which I love Loguru. I think it's really great. I used Logbook for a long time from Armin Ronacher,
Oh,
but then I've been slowly moving towards Loguru.
nice. Yeah, I really like. So another thing about, like a lot of data scientists, they use print, which is nothing wrong with print. Um, like, in fact, you shouldn't use. I think it's overkill if you use print in a notebook, right? But when it comes to, like, if you want to write production ready code, if you have a bunch of prints, because a lot of time you had debugging print, right? And if, yeah, you can go back and like delete them and everything, but wouldn't it be great? But then, like, if you go back into development environment, then you need to like put it back. Or if you don't do it at all, if you keep all the print inside your code, you go into development, now you have a bunch of noise when you see the output. So with logging, just a simple way of you thinking about, I think a big advantage of logging is you can do logging, and you can use different mode like debug, info, warning, error. So you can set the level based on, you can show, like, let's say if you go into, you in development environment, you want to show the debug level. If you go into the production environment, then you might want to do like the info level only. And but one drawback of logging is I think it's take a lot, quite a bit of boilerplate code.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. So it really, even if you can copy and paste, even it's like a one barrier, like a one barrier to use logging. Why should I do all of this code when I can just use print?
Right.
So
It's got like you got to register handlers and
yeah.
all sorts of funky stuff. Yeah.
And but what if you can have the advantage of print, like so easy to use, and the benefit of logging? Then that's why I'm such a big fan of Loguru, which have the best of both worlds. And other things that it allows is beautiful out of the box. So the login output, it looks colorful, it's very easy to see. With a standard login, you need to do a lot of, you, what do you want to show? You want to show this, you want to show the lines of code, you want to show the function where the output is coming from. All of those configurations with Loguru, you can just say from Loguru import logger, and then logger dot info something something, and then the output is very beautiful.
Yeah, I really like it. You can basically just you do if you wanted to like kind of keep your print style, you don't have to. You can just import it and use it, and it just prints, right?
Yeah,
The other thing, like you pointed out, this is a super big for people who are primarily data scientists who haven't worked with logging a lot or new to programming. Instead of just saying logger print, you say logger debug or logger info or logger error, and then you can say production, just show me the errors, or hey, something's going wrong. Actually, show me all the warnings and the info, and you
yeah,
can dial it up and down without changing the code. So you can leave your effective print statements there and just turn them off with a configuration, maybe with Hydra. Who knows?
yeah.
Yeah, really nice. And the color.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
color is very nice as well. It's very colorful.
yeah. And the color persists through files, by the way. Right. So if you have Log Guru log into a file and then you tail the file in your terminal, you see the color still, which is awesome.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's a new thing for me.
Yeah, yeah. Because some of my stuff is all logging with Log Guru, and I tail it, and the color comes through, and it's
Wow.
so much easier. Like for example, on the website, one of the things that I'm logging to a separate file is what are the requests, what is the response time, what is the status code? Is it a 500? Is it 2000? Is it a 30? Whatever, right? All that. And so I'll actually have it change the color based on what happens. So if the message is a 500, it's a different color than if it's a 200. Or if the response time is over 500 milliseconds, it changes color to like a warning sign versus if it's under. Like, and all that stuff comes through, and it's like so nice with
So
Loguru.
nice. Yeah, especially when you have a lot of logs, and that is very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Git. Let's talk about source control.
Yeah, version control is, I think, is huge. It's very useful, and it's very important for data scientists. But I don't see it's being used enough. I was in, yeah, in the last time I was machine learning engineer in Accenture, and working with clients. So I was building kind of like a data science environment, data science tool that integrated with say AWS SageMaker. And it's funny how many data scientists are not using Git, and like there are multiple data science team, and they want to communicate with each other. They want to share their work, but then every time they want to share their work, it just um, it's so hard for them because they don't have a source version control, which surprised me. It's a big client. I mean, it's a big. So why don't they use Git? Um, and if they do, it's not very good practices. So I that's why I want to educate data scientists more about Git. Um, and to
Yeah.
me, yeah, Git is so important for several reasons. First, let's say if you do something right, you mess up some code. You write you for Let me give an example of data scientists. They write a model, they write code that produces a model that works great. Then like later they want to twist some parameters, maybe experiment with different type of processing, see if the model performance can increase, and they mess it up. The model decreases in performance, and they have edited two or three files. Now they need to, okay, what did I edit? Now I need to revert it. And if
Right.
you don't have you don't already like save the last version that was working, you cannot just revert to it, right? But with Git, you can. There's multiple things. If you just a solo data scientist, then you can revert it to the last working version. Um, and but if you work with other data scientists, then you can share. You can also collaborate with them. Like different data scientists can work on different versions, and then as they or different features, and when they ready for it to be published, and they can merge it together,
Yeah.
which is so much better when you do it with Git than manually going lines to lines.
I think I agree with you. I think data scientists don't use source control, version control enough, and I think that even when people work alone on their own project, they
Mhm.
should use they should use Git or something else. And honestly, they should just use Git these days because it's the lingua franca of everything that people are doing. You know what? But it lets you do exactly what you're talking about, and it's not just, oh no, I have to go back. But I think a really important part, people, speaking to the people who don't really use it that much, or they only use it in their professional settings, in the team maybe. I think it lets you be fearless in exploring new ideas, right? Like, all right, I'm going to commit this version, and then let me just terrorize my code and like try something crazy. And oh my gosh, it worked. Great, we'll keep it. If it doesn't work, nothing lost. You can 100% go back. And if they're not, I mean, that's a good reason even by yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I feel like it's so easy. You can do git add, commit. That I mean, there's a lot of things you can do with Git, but I think to just learn some basic git add, git commit, git push. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to learn, there's maybe 5 or 6 commands you got to learn. Mostly your tools that you're working with. You mentioned VS Code. It's got awesome Git and
Oh yeah,
source
I use
control
VS Code.
integration
Yeah,
and
it's easy.
PyCharm and others.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really nice. Let me give you 2 more ideas and see how these land with you, okay? For
Mhm.
why I think Git is now more important than ever.
Yeah.
Number one, if you're doing any agentic coding, Here's another reason to use like a proper editor instead of a notebook as well, potentially. But you can go and say, hey, AI agent, I would like you to change this and add this feature and do this thing. And it'll just go and go for, 10, 15 minutes. If what I find a lot of times with these agentic coding things is they make great progress. You're like, wow, this is
Yeah.
amazing. It makes more great progress. Like, how is this even possible? I live in the future. And then the next step is, oh no, it broke it all. You know what I mean? And you're
So
like,
yeah.
oh, yeah. You have the same experience?
Yes, and I love that you go into this topic because that's kind of I think of the best practices I have been mentioned is more important than ever now that you have AI, you're working with AI because two different things, right? A lot of time you wanted to do something and then it broke. So you want to go back to the previous version. That's one thing. Another thing is if you commit very frequently, then you can see what it changed and you can
Yes.
catch it before you commit it or you push because so many, I think it's so frequently that I saw it do something that is not optimal. For example, multiple nested with AI, a lot of time it overcomplicates the solution. It make it so many try, accept, and if else, and or like it use it's hard code. It just bad practices. But with if you did if you control, you use version control, you can see like the difference, like the last code and the new code, and you can catch it before you commit. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's more important than ever.
Yeah, you're 100% right. You're right on it. I find that when I'm doing the agentic coding side of things,
Mhm.
I actually have the source control tab open in my editor, not the files tab, but the source control.
Yes.
And as it's going, I'll see what files are changed and I'll start like looking at the diffs. Even while it's still working, I'm like, oh, it's on a good path. Oh no, it shouldn't be doing this. And either you ask it to fix it or you just go, no, I'm reverting it. Yeah, I added a feature to the website, not a super big one, but kind of touched a lot of files. I think there was 15 commits to achieve that change because every time I'm like, okay, the AI has gotten something right. I'm like, save that to
Yes.
take because it's like exactly like you described. It's awesome.
Yeah, I experienced the same. Like I would have so many commits for like one feature change because also something that I tell it to do is just let's say if I want to implement like a mm, something I really like to do is go very thoroughly with like planning very thoroughly in advance before I even code to ensure like everything is what I expected, and then I let it run, right? um and what I did, it depends on what I do. But recently I tried to develop like a workflow to go from my code into newsletter. So I wanted to implement something, uh, and I want to be able to walk away and go back and be able to go back to each. So I break it into phases. Like let's say I break it into 5 phases, right? Um the easiest phase and the more complicated phase, like the nice to have feature. Now I want to go back into each phase and see if it breaks. I want to know when it breaks. So um, I for every phase ask it to commit so that if I want to,
Yeah.
if it breaks somewhere, I can go back to the previous version. Which also another thing that you can ask it to commit while it's
Oh,
working.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. I haven't thought about asking it to commit. That's cool. I'll give you one final reason to use Git in the
Mhm.
agentic world. And then I think we're out of time. We're going to have to call it. But
Mhm.
this has been a great conversation. One other thing you talked about, like, oh, it's made good progress and then something didn't work. And you can actually tell it. You gave your example. Let me make this more concrete. You gave your example of, oh, I made some changes as, forget the AI, right? I made some changes. It turns out that the performance fell apart. I edited 3 files. I couldn't quite remember what was wrong.
Yeah.
You could go to an agentic AI and say, please look at my local Git history from this commit forward and
Yeah.
try to understand why the performance fell apart. And I bet you it will have some really good ideas, if not know exactly why. And it can just, it will do what we described for us in reverse. Like it'll just look at the Git history and go, this change, this change. Oh, if this changed, I bet it had this effect. And then, right. So you can leverage it in reverse and feed it to the AI to get understanding too.
Yeah, that's such a great use case that you just talk about. A lot of time, you're like, okay, use git diff, look at the difference and tell me what's wrong. That's such a that's another thing that I use very often. Also, another thing on top of it is, let's say it doesn't code the way you like. Everybody have their own preferred style to do thing, right? So sometimes you can edit it and you tell it, okay, look at the your implementation and my implementation, and like just kind of taking note of the difference, so that like the next time it will be able to create more similar to the style you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea. I feel like we honestly could talk about this for hours, but
Yeah.
we're out of time. We're out of time, Quinn. So thank you for being here. I think let's leave it with this. Let's leave it with two things. First of all, maybe final call to action. People are interested in CodeCut AI, all of the stuff you've created. How do they get started with all of your resources?
Yes, so just go to my website, CodeCut, so CodeCut.ai, and then you will see how to sign up for newsletter. There's also a book tab that if you're interested in production ready data science, you can buy it there. It's currently on sales. It's Labor Day week, so 20% off. And yeah, that's it. And if you want to read my blog, go to blog. If you want to see a sample of my code snippet, go to short posts. Everything is very easy to navigate. Just
Yeah,
go to CodeCut.ai.
fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing all your experience and your work. Really, congratulations on CodeCut. It's a cool project.
Thank you so much.
You bet. See you later.
We'll see you. Bye.